Welcome to Global South Women's Forum on Sustainable Development. Before we begin, a few virtual housekeeping rules. This session provides interpretation in English and Spanish. Please go to interpretation to choose your language channel. Please mute original audio to hear only the interpreter. You would only need to remain in the language channel of your choice at all times. Welcome again to Global South Women's Forum 2020. To maximize the bandwidth for all participants, we kindly request that you do not turn on your videos unless you are a speaker. Please mute your microphones also to reduce any interruptions or unnecessary background noise. To maximize your bandwidth, and if you are experiencing slow bandwidth, please close any unnecessary programs on your computer. You are very welcome to use the public chat box to engage with one another. And please note that this session is being live streamed and the recording will remain public on the ERA Asia Pacific YouTube channel. We are very committed to making sure that this is an inclusive and safe space and will not tolerate harassment of any kind. You are obliged to be respectful and to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without prior notice. We welcome you again and thank you for joining the session. And with that, we hand over to our hosts for the session.
Hello and welcome to all of you. We are really happy to see so many of you from all over the world for this panel discussion on care work amid COVID-19 and beyond towards a feminist and human rights-based global social pact on care. I'm Valentine and I work at the Secretariat of ESCR-Net, supporting the work on women and economic, social and cultural rights. And together with Viviana, who is an advisor on women, also at ESCR-Net, we will both be moderating this session. But let me first introduce ESCR-Net. This is the International Network for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And this is a collaborative initiative of over 280 social movements, NGOs and advocates across 75 countries to secure economic and social justice through human rights. ESCR-Net is led by members who build shared analysis, create spaces for mutual learning, and undertake collective advocacy and campaigns, foremost through working groups, such as the one on women and economic, social, and cultural rights. Ultimately, ESCR-Net is aimed to center economic, social, and cultural rights in global debates and amplify the voices and lived experiences of affected communities. So the objective of this session today is to introduce the proposed framework with key policy recommendations to reframe the care economy and advance a feminist social pact on care. But from this initial proposal, the idea is to build a global advocacy strategy for a global call to reframe the economy as a caring economy via mutual learning and solidarity across regions. So we're really excited about this discussion, and we hope we'll find ways together to overcome one of the most structural barriers for gender equality. So the sky is our limit. And during the panel discussion, we will first hear Viviana, who will present a general overview of the proposal on the Global Social Pact on Care. Then we will give the floor to 5 members of the network, and we will then break into rooms to have a group discussion. Then going back to the main room to share some of the main inputs and discuss ways forward. So now I will give the floor to Viviana, who will present the general overview of the proposal on the Global Social Pact on Care. So we're just having a technical problem with some of the computers. So let's just give us a couple of minutes, and yes, I think we have a way of solving the problem. It's just due to internet access.
everyone, and thank you very much for your patience. We are very sorry for the technical issues that we are having. So I will now start very quickly to summarize. We have been building a proposal for a social pact on care, which is transformative of gender relationships in the realm of social reproduction and overall in the world of work. So as many of you are perhaps aware of, the issue of who performs care worldwide reveals many injustices. Care is mostly performed by women and girls worldwide. So we can say that in no country all around the world, there's equality regarding care work. We could also say that as care is not socially or economically valued in our society, most of the care burden tends to fall on women who are already marginalized and subjected to multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Currently, care work is the largest subsidy to the global economy insofar as it sustains and reproduces society's labor force at a very low or not cost at all at the expense of women's exploitation. The enormous amount of unpaid care work that is performed on a daily basis has been estimated to be approximately $11 trillion annually, which represent an amount of 9 points of the global GDP. And in spite of this picture and the huge importance for care for the survival of our societies, for the survival and the continuity of our world, care continues to be undervalued. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen further revealed the unfair social distribution of care, which is resulting in a public health crisis. We have seen many governments attempting to rapidly raise the curve of care provision, but these efforts have largely benefited the corporate sector as opposed to being focused foremost on human rights. All of this in a context of already underfunded healthcare systems, unfair social distribution of care, and increasing privatization of public services. Without adequate policy and deeper structural responses, we can now predict that the aftermath of the pandemic could further entrench the unequal distribution of unpaid care work and feminization of poverty. We could quickly mention just a few of the gendered impacts in relation to care. We have seen women's care burden being exacerbated. We have seen violence against women being exacerbated. We have seen countries recurring to the IMF and kind of expanding their debt. So what is now around the corner is more austerity measures who will result in cutting quality public services and increased burdens for women in terms of their care work. So being aware of this reality, ESCR-Net members have been working in building a shared analysis and a 6R framework to start promoting a global social pact on care. And this is the need to, at a minimum, promote the recognition, redistribution, reduction of care, the representation of carers and community-based networks and cooperatives, the representation in decision-making in relation to care, and this is what we will be talking about today. We will have amazing speakers across regions and countries who will be talking about each of these elements that at a minimum should constitute a new global social pact. And when we talk about a new social pact, it builds on the recognition of an existent and of an unjust current social pact, which is a pact that women never agreed to, and which is a pact centered in invisibilization of care, undervaluation of care, overexploitation of women, which is a pact that impoverishes women, and a pact that from all perspectives is unfair, and which is at the root of the gender injustices in our societies. So we think that a new pact is necessary, a pact that is transformative of gender relationships, a pact that transforms the division between the realm of social reproduction and the so-called labor market or the productive sector. And this is what we want to talk about today. We wanted to create this space to brainstorm with you and to build shared strategies and to think together what is the form that a social pact on care could take and what are openings and opportunities and potential targets and allies that we should take into account. We wanted to invite a broader conversation because we are cognizant that this is a pact that needs to be part of a broader conversation in society, and something that we know how to do as feminist movements, as feminist activists, and as grassroots leaders is creating alliances, right? And this is what we want to do, and this is what we want to invite you to do in this space. So we will have great speakers that will be presenting each of these elements, and then we will move to breakout rooms. So I will leave the floor. I will pass the floor over to you, Valentin, to continue with facilitation.
Hello again. So now it's time to introduce the members of the network who will be presenting the 6 pillars of this Global Social Pact on Care. And I kindly remind each one of the speakers that they only have 5 minutes for their presentation. So let me first start with Claudia Lazaro. Claudia is the Secretary of Human Rights and Gender at the Union of the Leather Industry of Argentina, SOCRA. She's the co-founder of the National Trade Union Network Against Violence in the World of Work. And this is a network of 83 organizations and also the Trade Union Commission of Human Rights, composed of 55 unions. So Claudia, you have the floor.
No me deja habilitar la cámara. Ahí sí. ¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Gracias, Valentín. Gracias, Viviana. Bueno, dentro de estos 6 pilares, para nosotros es importante hablar también de la reducción y la redistribución, pero sin antes mencionar que cuando hablamos de cuidados lo tenemos que poner en un marco de derechos, en un marco de derechos humanos, y ese marco de derechos humanos también hay que ponerlo en el marco del trabajo, en el marco del trabajo decente. Toda actividad que hacemos desde que nacemos hasta que morimos, vamos a necesitar cuidados. Por ende, por un lado vamos a realizar cuidados y por otro lado vamos a recibir cuidados. Entonces, en ese marco me parece importante destacar la necesidad de poder poner en potencia estas 3 R's. Dentro de lo que lleva también los trabajos del cuidado, vemos que la división sexual del trabajo hace parte de dónde realizamos y quiénes realizan los cuidados. Mayoritariamente los trabajos del cuidado están ligados a las mujeres y está ligado a la comunidad LGTBIQ+. En esto tenemos que ver también que hay una distribución desigual, que esa distribución desigual no solo se da hacia afuera cuando salimos a trabajar de nuestros hogares, porque ahí el 95%, por lo menos en Argentina, de los trabajos de cuidado al servicio doméstico lo realizan mujeres y disidencias, el 75% de los trabajos ligados a la salud lo realizan mujeres, y el 50% de los trabajos ligados más a lo social y a lo comunitario también lo realizan las mujeres. Esto también se da y va muy ligado a lo que es la brecha salarial que tenemos en nuestro país. Ese 29% que tenemos de diferencia se da porque los trabajos más feminizados, pero también menor pagos, los realizamos las mujeres y el colectivo de LGTBIQ. Dentro de lo que nosotros pensamos en esta distribución desigual de los cuidados, nos parece importante, por primer lugar, poder visibilizar, ¿no? Si nosotros visibilizamos y ponemos en función de derecho, y pensar también el tiempo que nos ocupa al cuidar. Esto me parece necesario pensar en cómo es la organización social del trabajo y cómo es la organización social del trabajo de los cuidados en particular, salir de la visión familiarista a pensar los cuidados de la función más desde la comunidad, y cómo el Estado también es artífice en provocar políticas públicas que tiendan a redistribuir y a reducir las tareas de cuidado. Dentro de todo este núcleo de tareas no remuneradas, cuando las llevamos al seno de los hogares y al seno de las comunidades, donde muchos en la pandemia se ha potenciado los trabajos en los centros comunitarios, en los comedores escolares, en los comedores comunitarios, necesitamos ponerlo en clave de derechos, pero no olvidar que una de las cosas que nosotros tenemos que profundizar es trabajar sobre esa división sexual del trabajo, para que resignifiquemos el trabajo de las mujeres y para que resignifiquemos el trabajo de las disidencias. En este reconocimiento y teniendo estas cuestiones claras de aquellas tareas que territorialmente las llevan a cabo las mujeres, y también esas tareas que las llevan a cabo los varones, decimos que ahí se encuentra no solo la desigualdad entre varones y mujeres, sino también en la desigualdad y el núcleo duro de esas desigualdades, para cómo las mujeres nos manejamos en el mercado del trabajo y cómo accedemos al mercado de trabajo, pero también cómo accedemos a mejores condiciones en el trabajo y cómo rompemos con la segregación ocupacional, cómo rompemos con las brechas que tenemos horizontales y verticales en ese ingreso. Cuando nosotros hablamos de redistribuir, lo que hablamos es no solo de redistribuir hacia adentro de los hogares, en donde varones y mujeres empecemos a realizar las mismas tareas, sin importar el género, sino también de poder hacerlo hacia afuera en los trabajos y poder armar una conciliación entre el trabajo y el hogar. Para eso es necesario que haya políticas públicas, no solo que la cultura cambie, sino con inversión del Estado para poder incrementar la capacidad en cuidados del Estado y en proporcionar cuidados hacia las comunidades. Para eso y en esas prácticas, desde Argentina, por ejemplo, estamos implementando específicamente en la provincia de Buenos Aires el sello Construir Igualdad, que es un sello en donde uno de los ejes en el sector privado promueve no solo la corresponsabilidad, sino promueve revisar los horarios y las cargas que tenemos las mujeres en el trabajo para poder armonizarlo, sin dejarnos caer en la vuelta de la feminización a los trabajos. En Argentina hace muy poco se reglamentó la ley de teletrabajo con un artículo específico que habla de los cuidados. Nosotras lo que ponemos en esto del teletrabajo, que decimos que en algunos aspectos puede mejorar la calidad de trabajo de las mujeres, pero lo que tenemos mucha preocupación es que eso nos vuelva a las mujeres solo a nuestros hogares. Y después un núcleo que debemos trabajar en la distribución es en lo comunitario, en esas comunidades donde mayoritariamente las mujeres son las que han puesto el hombro en la pandemia. Necesitamos fortalecer y armar redes donde el Estado proporcione esos cuidados. Y en la reducción del tiempo también, porque ese exceso de trabajo que lo vivimos en la pandemia, pero que las mujeres lo vivimos hace largo ya con la doble jornada de trabajo, lo hemos padecido no solo en nuestros cuerpos, sino también en nuestra psiquis y en nuestras cuestiones emocionales para podernos llevar. Necesitamos que el tiempo de ocio también sea contenido cuando hablamos de la reducción. Reducir la carga física de los cuidados quiere decir hablar de nuevas masculinidades y pensar y proponerles en este pacto social un pacto feminista donde las nuevas masculinidades estén en el centro también, para poder generar una dinámica familiar, pero una dinámica comunitaria distinta, y poder pensar en remunerar y que generen políticas públicas en la remuneración de esas tareas de trabajo no remunerado. Y ahí abro un paréntesis sabiendo que la población de más bajos ingresos, en la que está sumida en la pobreza, tiene una sobrecarga de los cuidados y aparte muchas veces trabaja realizando cuidados o mal pagos o sin derechos. Esto, si bien en Argentina tenemos una ley específica para quien realizan trabajos de cuidado en otras casas, nosotros lo que estamos proponiendo muy fuertemente es que se ponga en vigencia la legislación para que todos tengan acceso a la seguridad social y acceso a la salud. Nosotros creemos que no hay forma de poder poner en potencia un nuevo pacto social sobre los cuidados si ese pacto social no tiene como el centro y el eje fundamental la igualdad de género, la justicia social, y potenciar y profundizar que cuando hablamos de cuidados, hablamos de derechos humanos, hablamos de personas que requieren a lo largo de su vida cuidados, y que esos cuidados son trabajo, y muchas veces hay que conciliar no solo que es el trabajo decente e ir al trabajo decente, sino en muchos lugares tenemos que volver a poner el ojo en la registración de todas esas trabajadoras, mayoritariamente mujeres, para poder sí, de una vez y para siempre, que el trabajo de los cuidados sea reconocido, sea remunerado, sea redistribuido, sea reducido, pero que también ayude a poner a la economía en movimiento, porque está claro que en esta pandemia, donde nosotros tuvimos aislamientos preventivos obligatorios, la única actividad económica que no cesó fue la actividad de los cuidados. Entonces, si la crisis capitalista...
Claudia.
Ya termino. Si la crisis capitalista la pagamos las mujeres y está feminizada, que la salida sea feminista a esta crisis mundial que tenemos de los cuidados. Muchas gracias, Valentina, y disculpe por la demora.
Thank you, Claudia. We know there's a lot to say. Now I'm giving the floor back to Viviana to talk about the recognition part, pillar of the social pact on care.
Yes, thanks, Valentina. Could you please move to the other slide, please? Yeah, so we had invited Claribet, who is a leader of domestic workers organization in Colombia, but unfortunately she couldn't join. So I would present very quickly the issue of recognition. So we have said that one of the structural causes of care to be undervalued in our societies with all the other social and economic consequences that entail is actually its undervaluation, is its invisibility. And we do think that recognition should be one of the main issues to be addressed in terms of public policy, and as an element being part of a new and transformative social pact on care. And we think that a first component of that is transforming norms and stereotypes that reproduce the feminization of unpaid care work and relegate it to individual responsibility. This idea of the man as the breadwinner and women as subjugated to the private space or the household has created this notion and this culturally affirmed idea of care as a work exclusive of women, and unpaid or underpaid when it's in the labor market, the so-called labor market. So something very important to do is putting in place transformative measures via campaigns and kind of amplifying why this work is important. And a very important element there is measuring and making visible care and the contribution of care to the economies and the society as a whole. So in many countries, time use surveys has been increasingly used to measure the time that women and girls, to measure how care is distributed in our society. And it's been visible that 3/4 of the unpaid care work being performed worldwide is done by women and girls, right? And it is very important to put that on the table and to make that visible for that to be transformed. And although it is very important that the time devoted to unpaid care work and the value, the economic value that it creates is kind of, compared with other sectors in the GDP, we also think that it is not enough measuring care, and it is not enough saying that care work worldwide represent 9 points of the global GDP is not enough. We think that talking about care is more kind of advancing a political vision that elevate life-sustaining actions, that elevate care as an activity for the continuity of our world, and that is a very important claim because that goes straight to the dominant economic model, right? That speaks to a model that is based on this idea of limitless economic growth that we think that needs to be stopped. So the idea of recognition is kind of transforming norms and stereotypes, measuring care, and making visible the contribution of care, not only to the economy, but also to the continuity of our world as we know it, and advancing this political vision, right? So, yeah, thank you very much, Valentin.
Thank you very much, Viviana. So we're now giving the floor to Charlene May, who is going to talk about the pillar on rights. So Charlene May is a legal practitioner at the Women's Legal Center in Cape Town, South Africa, where she advances feminist litigation before the courts to ensure substantive equality. She has extensive experience in litigation and advocacy using an intersectional lens to ensure that laws and policies take into consideration women's lived realities. Charlene, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to reflect a little bit on care work as a right and not a privilege. And I think as the world starts to shift during 2020 and in COVID in particular, we're seeing an increase of the right to care being viewed as a privilege, and that access to socioeconomic rights in particular are being designated or provided more for people within privileged positions rather than looking at those who are most vulnerable within our society. And so, as Viviana said in the introduction, the COVID-19 pandemic actually gives us a unique opportunity as it highlights the inequalities that exist in many of our countries in respect of the enjoyment of socioeconomic rights. And here we're looking, of course, at access to water, access to sanitation, access to housing, healthcare, food security. And these are just some of the rights that have been impacted by COVID-19, but of course have been inequalities in terms of access that we have experienced within our communities and within our respective countries. Our healthcare systems in particular have come under the spotlight during this time, as many of our healthcare systems struggles to provide access to healthcare. And as many of our frontline workers within our healthcare system are at risk being exposed to extended periods of working time, but also being exposed to infection and being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So therefore, it's become more critically important for us to have a conversation about how we frame care within its many facets as it ranges in terms of or intersects with the rights that we have available to us. And it therefore becomes important to emphasize that care is not just a nice to have or a need, that it is actually deeply entrenched within a rights-based framework. It also allows us then to critically demand health care as this time does present us with a unique opportunity to reframe what care as a right would look like in terms of access and the enjoyment thereof. When we look at, and Viviana touched on this a little bit now when she talked about rights recognition, I think that it's important to note that we're not suggesting that care is a new right, and that this conversation is not about trying to introduce a new concept of care as a right, but that what it really does is that it seeks to provide a feminist lens to a right that is existing as a universal right, as a basic human right. It's therefore important for us also to acknowledge that the right to care has been recognized in a few international instruments and by some of our international mechanisms, whether we're looking at the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or if we look more locally at the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons. They all speak particularly and specifically to care. And I think that very much this has been shaped with it. This has influenced how care has been shaped as something that needs to be provided for the most vulnerable within our society. And it has become a privilege and a nice to have rather than a right that should be recognized, and that we really need to start having conversations about what that looks like. It leaves us, of course, to learn lessons and to look at countries that have progressive legislation or that have some policies in existence that speak to care, but doesn't speak to care as work and doesn't necessarily speak to care within a socio-economic or a rights-based framework. And I think that if we think about our own country context, we can think of examples in terms of how care has been structured, but how it's not necessarily looked at through this feminist lens or through the intersectional lens that Viviana was talking about during her presentation. And looking at how, because of the nature of the work, it's so deeply entrenched within patriarchy and so deeply entrenched within this discriminatory framework as it's viewed as women's work. And so really we need to talk about the right to equality and the right to substantive equality for us to be able to start having the uncoupling conversation, the recognition, the redistribution conversation, but also the rights recognition conversation. And then, of course, we need to be mindful that we're talking about care within two very interconnected paradigms. We're talking about care based on the individual right to have access, and if we use health as an example, the individual person's right to have access to quality care, health care, whether that's health care within their home setting, whether that is care that's provided to children, or whether it is care that's provided to the elderly or to the disabled. And that's very much an individual socioeconomic right to that care framework. But we also look very much at it from the rights perspective of the caregiver, of the care worker. And I think that that's important because not often is the work is care seen as work and framed within the context of the care worker. And so when we talk about the care worker, we need to look at who that person is. We know that in the majority of cases, it's women. It's people that fall into categories of existing vulnerability, whether that's class or whether that's
1 minute,
race.
Charlene.
Thank you. Whether it's sexual orientation or whether it's gender identity. And so it falls normally to a particular category of people that are required to meet this care burden or that fulfills this care work function. And so therefore, it's important for us to have conversations about what does just and favorable conditions of work look like for a care worker? And what does that look like through this feminist lens, where we recognize the interconnectedness of discrimination, and where we recognize that even within a particular class of persons that does care work, that is not a homogeneous group, and that we need to really look at how does policy and laws recognize the rights framework of care, but also how does policies speak to the needs and the rights that both the recipient of care has, but also the care worker has. And really that is what the conversation today is hoping to elicit some more examples from you and for us to be able to have a conversation about it. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much, Valentine.
Thank you, Charlene. Now I'll give the floor to Noe Min on representation. So AE is the Director of Promotion of Indigenous and Nature Together, Point, an organization that promotes the rights of indigenous peoples in Myanmar. She's also an executive council member of Asia Indigenous Peoples Act, known also as AIPP, a regional network of indigenous peoples organizations across 14 countries in the Asia region. So AE, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share the topic on representation. As an essential aspect of transformative care policy, representation of care worker and community-based care network must be central to the governance of care. This is vital to advancing gender-sensitive, responsive, and transformative system of care that ensure substantive equality and the right to receive quality care, provide care under fair conditions, and to serve care as the pillar of a collective vision of the care that we want. This is why care worker and community-based care networks need to be part of the equation, and their life experiences taken into account in elaborating and implementing care policies. A transformative care system must realize substantive equality and address intersecting forms of oppression and exploitation, center women and communities' voices and analysis in order for care system to be gender responsive and transformative in practice. Furthermore, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, grassroots alternative and community-based network of care have responded to the heightened inequality resulting from the crisis and the pervasive impact of the flawed governmental responses. For instance, indigenous community in Guatemala are bartering goods and consuming local product as described by Consejo de Beclo Uchtet in Honduras. Garifuna community have created healthcare focal point, community healthcare protocol, and are using their traditional knowledge to protect their community as highlighted by Ofrane. Many other communities have successfully developed their own protocol and provided the kind of care that best suits their needs while applying their traditional knowledge and alternatives. Such community-based care networks and practices need to be strengthened. For instance, by allocating the resources to develop gender transformative, local, and community-led program of care as part of broader care system. Therefore, we have the key demand for representation as to ensure meaningful representation of paid and unpaid care worker, and community-based care network in the governance of care. To strengthen transparency and accountability in public and private care provision. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, EE. Then we forgot at the beginning to ask you to, if you can please change your name. So usually you can see 3 dots close to your name, to your, I don't know if it's the image, and there are 3 dots. You can click on that and you see rename. And if you could start with putting the language you speak and your name, that would be brilliant to help us facilitate the breakout session. So for instance, in my case, it would be English and /Valentine, or it can be Spanish, etc. Thank you. Now I'm giving the floor to just a minute. I'm now giving the floor to Karin Medhabu-Hamed on the Reframing the Economy as a Caring Economy. So Karin is the Programs and External Relations Coordinator at the Democracy and Workers' Rights Center in Palestine. For the past decade, she has been involved in reviewing national legislation and policy from a gender equality perspective, developing labor education tools and research on women's rights and gender equality issues in the world of work in Palestine. Karin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to approach now how we can reframe the economy as a caring economy. So how do we accomplish the transition to a regenerative economy that ensures care and substantive equality, prioritizing human rights and sustainability? First of all, we believe we need to abandon GDP as a measure of progress and development and center care and well-being. Economic growth, as we all know, is not correlated with improvements in well-being, but instead associated with rising inequality and severe environmental degradation. The famous 1% who now own more and more of the world's wealth at the expense of everyone else. Our vision of what we call the economy and the world of work must center on care, which means basically prioritizing well-being instead of profit, recognizing unpaid care work as well as paid work, and transforming the current unfair model of social reproduction, valuing the importance of time as well as money to approach and redress inequalities, and centering the planet and human rights through recognition of ecological limits. Basically, we think that GDP should be replaced with more holistic alternatives, such as social and ecological indicators, and that we need to take steps to decenter economic growth and transition to a care-based regenerative economy. That would require systemic change and giving more importance to the growth of social solidarity economy, for example. We also need an economy that invests in social reproduction. The global health crisis has confirmed the importance of well-funded public and gender-inclusive services and care systems to address unequal distribution. Low investment in care, rooted in expectation that women must bear the gaps in care provision, is a huge barrier to gender equality. Basically, investing in care systems and quality public services will improve the situation of care provision during the current pandemic and contribute to increased employment and provision of better work conditions during economic recovery. These in turn would benefit women by tackling the issue of feminization of poverty and preventing them from paying the cost of a crisis, as we see is happening right now with deepening gender gaps. And in this respect, to have an economy that invests in social reproduction, we need two interventions, two main key elements. First of all, we need to counter privatization of our public services, which happens all over and which has shown during the current crisis that it's not sustainable and doesn't provide the type of care that we need for everyone. And there are several alternatives to privatization that have been widely discussed and proposed in order to have organize and fund rights-based public services. One of his approaches could be basically centered on public, decentralized, and community-led services. So again, more investment by and in the communities. The second element is that expenditure on care services and other public services which help to reduce and distribute care work, as was mentioned, for instance, water and sanitation or public transportation, they must be prioritized in government budget. Governments need to implement progressive taxation, and we need international cooperation to expand the fiscal space and increase public expenditure on care. That means that governments should examine and reform how they generate, mobilize, allocate, and spend money to meet their human rights obligations, and among them, and at their forefront, their obligations related to our economic, social, and cultural rights. But we're not just talking about increasing, reallocating resources, but increasing them. And that requires fair and equitable taxation that does not put the tax burden on the poor and does not favor men over women. And of course, we should at all costs avoid austerity. These all requires stronger international cooperation, especially for us in the global South. There's a very important element in order to help raise the financing needed to fund care services, which is debt cancellation. Debt cancellation of low and moderate income countries and communities, and giving primacy to human rights obligations and environmental protections in all lending policies and safeguards of international institutions is fundamental. It is essential for countries in the South to have the fiscal space to actually pay for this essential and develop the essential care services that they need and the social infrastructure, and prevent a further decimation of public services. In addition, international cooperation should also include stricter measures to prevent illicit financial flows, and including corporate tax abuses, and introduce wealth taxes so that the rich actually contribute as much as the less favorized, and end all the tax loopholes and the havens that allow all these corporations and the billionaires to hide away the money, and make it more difficult for everyone to finance public services.
1 minute, Karine.
Okay, and to finance care, the care economy, basically. And that is also one of the recommendations of the ILO in the future work, that we need to rethink our economy as a care economy, and to really invest in this economy. And this will not happen as long as we don't have the fiscal tools to do that. I think I can give you the floor back because I'm done with my presentation. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Karine. And I'm now giving the floor to Viviana for the next session. I mean, for the next part of the session, sorry.
Thanks, Valentine. Yes, friends, so being aware of time, we have done a few changes in our methodology. So now we will go directly to the breakout rooms. The idea for the breakout rooms, Valentine, could you project the slide with the questions, please? The idea for the breakout rooms is addressing the questions that you are seeing in the presentation. You will go to groups integrated more or less by 7 or 8 people. We would love to know your thoughts and your ideas regarding what form could take a global social pact on care, Should we talk about a UN declaration? Should we talk about a set of principles together with indicators? Or should we be talking about perhaps promoting care being recognized in constitution and legal frameworks in the countries? So this is a question we would love to hear your thoughts about. We would love also to know your ideas in terms of targets, in terms of allies, in terms of national advocacy, and how could like a global alliance of human rights organizations and social movements could eventually support advocacy at the national level. So these are the questions that we would love that you address in your groups. So Valentin will paste in the chat a link that would lead you to a Google Doc. In that Google Doc, we have pasted the questions, and we would love that you choose one person per group who will be the main reporter for each of the groups, and who will be in charge of taking notes and fitting into the Google Doc. I think I also have the link here. Yeah, there you go. So this is the link for the Google Doc. So if there's a person like familiarized with using Google Docs, we would really appreciate that you could take the leadership and take notes to fit into this Google Doc and introducing their the main outcomes of the group conversation. So you can input in that Google Doc in your language. It can be in either English or Spanish. If you are not familiarized with Google Docs, please just take notes somewhere else, and we will give you later an email to which you could later send your notes. But we would really appreciate to receive like your thoughts and ideas. So your notes are very important for us. So we know that Claudia, we know that Mar Martinez, you are Spanish speakers, but we would love to know if there's someone else who is a Spanish speaker. Can you please write it down in the chat? Hey, I'm a Spanish speaker. This way we will know what group to allocate you to. Okay, just pasting now the link to the Google Doc. Thanks, Laura. Is there any other person who is a Spanish speaker? Okay, Mónica Tomás, she's also a Spanish speaker. Who else? Quickly. Okay, so by now we are creating only one room for Spanish speakers integrated so far, but Claudia, Mónica, Mar. And then the other people could be allocated to English rooms. I think Clara as well is a Spanish speaker. Okay, so Rachel, are we okay to go now to the breakout rooms?
Vivi, how long do you want the breakout rooms to run for?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we will have the breakout rooms for 20 minutes.
Sure. See you guys on the other side. Have fun.
Thank you, Rachel.
No worries.
Hey everyone, we hope you had very enriching discussions within the groups. Now, we would love to invite the reporters to share the main takeaways of their conversations. Who would like to start?
Viviana, I can start.
Yeah, sure. Charlene, go ahead, please.
I was forward enough to be the rapporteur in my group, even though I spoke during the presentation. Yeah, I think that we had a very good conversation. I think one of the conversations that we had that was very important was the need to have more of these types of conversations. There was a comment around how safe spaces and spaces to have conversations are shrinking within our much more conservative kind of world that we are becoming, and that it's therefore important for us to almost to create spaces to have the conversation. There was also an emphasis on having the conversation with women, with the women that are performing the care, whether it's women doing unpaid care work in their homes, but also I think to have conversations with domestic workers, with healthcare workers, so that people can realize that the work that they are doing, so that the women can realize that the work that they are doing is in fact work, and it is deserving of recognition, and that within that rights framework, they should have access to socioeconomic rights protection. And so I think that that was a key takeaway from the group that I was in. And then the last comment that I wanted to make was a comment that came in right at the end. But I thought it was such a good comment to say that we shouldn't be waiting for allies, that we should be making allies, and we should be going out actively in having those conversations with people who might not be looking at this issue in the same way that we are. Or having the conversation within the frameworks that we are, but they are people that could, or organizations or institutions that could potentially be our allies if we reach out and start having the conversation. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. We had some other tidbits, but it's in my notes. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlene. Any other volunteer that would like to share the main takeaways of the discussion? You can just jump in.
Hello, I think I'll go next.
Sure.
Okay, I'm from wait, I'm looking at our notes. Yeah, I'm from group 2. Yeah, so uh, 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 so during the discussion, I mean during the presentation, we recognized how uh, we recognize the system inequalities that has put the burden of care work on women. And while care work is very important, it is we recognize that putting the burden of care work on women has resulted in a negative impacts. Yeah, so regarding the first question about what form could take a global social pact on care, we uh, 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 among what we discussed is that we should implement policies that would make a caring world possible, it is crucial to veer away from the neoliberal economic system, which has destroyed the social infrastructure, which has privatized social services and burdened women and transferred the burden of care to women. And then uh, when we talk about care during the pandemic, for example, one of the members of our group, uh, I think it's NK who shared about this. She's an indigenous woman. She said that for her, an indigenous woman, she thinks that it's important to revive indigenous ways of living and how they tackle food security and environmental development versus the neoliberal development. And then self-determination is also very important for them. NK, if you'd like to add about what I'm saying, it would be very welcome. Yeah. And then regarding the advocacy targets, one of our group members said that it's also important to engage the private sector, yeah, who can do the actual implementation. But also, we also said that the most important actor that could influence change that we need to engage to or influence to affect change is the the communities on ground, the communities who are most affected by this by systemic inequalities. Yeah, so we should empower them to enable them to participate more in democratic processes, in policy spaces, etc. Yeah, and we should make more space for them, yeah, to to help them shape their development paths. And then strengthening and empowering communities is also related to strengthening work at the national level. Yeah, I think that's what we've discussed. So if any of my group mates would like to add, I think that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Agatha, and to your group. Is there someone else who would like to share the main takeaways of the group discussion? Perhaps one of the Latin American participants. Okay, Mai?
On the point that Charlene had already mentioned, I was in group 1 with Charlene, about making allies that one of the participants suggested. I was just thinking most of our healthcare workers and most of our educators are women. So do we have to do a lot to reach out to those people and say, look, you know, check out your lives, what's happening in it, you know, to raise consciousness about the burden of care work. Surely there needs to be, I mean, I appreciate that the idea of unpaid care work is a relatively new understanding in terms of, you know, the general public. Probably people do not think about the work that they do at home as worthy of payment, but you know, people do not think that in our societies definitely do not think well consider it as women's work. So in that environment, there has to be some sort of realization that happens at the level of women to begin to demand this work to be valued. So in terms of making allies, perhaps there needs to be a narrative that needs to reach people with, to make it clear to them that they are carrying a huge burden, both the reproductive burden and the burden of production, and all the rest of the responsibilities of caring and looking after their families. So I think the conversation needs to go to these people in positions that could make a shift. I don't know if it has yet, but just a thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Umay. Well, it seems that we have run out of time. As a next step, I would like to say that after this session, it could be either tomorrow or early next week, we will be sending you all an email with the actual document for you to have it, to read it, and to hopefully comment on it. We would love to have your feedback, your comments, which pieces could be strengthened, what are other elements that should be taken into account, and hopefully we will keep in touch. Please, if you want to input more and if you want to introduce further ideas in the Google Doc in which you have took notes during this event and during the breakout rooms, please do so. All your ideas, all your feedback is very, very welcome. And finally, just wanted to show our appreciation to all of you for joining us today. Thank you very much for the great presenters that we had. Thanks, Valentin, as well for your facilitation. And thank you very much, all the amazing people of ERO Asia Pacific for this great space. Valentin, if you have something else to add before we close.
No, thank you so much. It's in spite of the technical issues we experienced at the beginning, it's a really rich and great conversation. And thank you all for also to the interpreters for always being available. And we're really looking forward to keeping the discussion going and strategizing, conspiring to get new ideas and to take it further.
Okay, friends. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the forum. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.